Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, I'm going to talk about some of the new stuff going on with Sly Flourish. We're going to look at the Allies and Enemies Kickstarter for Shadowdark, the Hall of Horrors Kickstarter. I want to get some feedback and talk to you about the Sly Flourish partnership with Let's Quest to help after-school programs. I'm going to give a little bit of a public service announcement for backing up your stuff and preserving your digital RPG products. We're going to dive into adventure types. What are the types of adventures and why is it useful to consider different adventure types? And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. Last week on Sly Flourish, I published the article, Tab Your Books. I really love to kind of dive into some of the table practical things that we do to help our games run well. This is an article about how to put little adhesive tabs in your books so that you can reference them during prep and during play. And whether you're running online or not, I still think it's handy to have a physical book nearby so you can flip through the book and use it, and how to get the most out of your books by tabbing it. This article was published over on Sly Flourish last week. You can find a link in the show notes. It was also sent out to those who subscribed on the Sly Flourish newsletter for free. And for Hero Tier subscribers to Patreon, I did a readings and reflections where I read this article out loud and then dove into some of the background and details about tabbing your books. Next week's article is Running Ravenloft with Shadowdark. This is a repost. I'm posting this every year about this time. I kind of repost this article or something like it, where I talk about how to run the original i6 Ravenloft adventure published back in 1983 using the Shadowdark rule system, which I think is a beautiful match for the two. And it's a really fun Halloween game. I now have players and scheduled my annual Halloween Ravenloft Shadowdark game. Looks really fun playing with some players I'd never played with before. So I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to be really fun. And if you would like to run i6 Ravenloft using Shadowdark, this article can help you out. You can, of course, find this article on Sly Flourish next week. Or I guess if you're already watching this show on YouTube or listening to the podcast, it is probably already published on Sly Flourish. You can also get it sent to your inbox by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter, which you should totally do. It's totally free to do it. And you get this article sent right to you. And I will be doing a readings and reflections, which will be broadcast. I'm going to record it on Monday. I'm going to post it on Thursday, where you can hear me read the article out loud and talk more about it. Next week, I'm going to be at Gamehole Con. Gamehole Con is an awesome convention run in Madison, Wisconsin. Lots of my friends are going. Lots of other creators are going there. It's going to be really fun. I am going to be running 2 Shadowdark games using the Cryptocurriculon, an adventure that I wrote specifically for convention play. I literally wrote the adventure so that I could run it at conventions like this. It will be my first time running Cryptocurriculon. Other people have already run Cryptocurriculon. It'll be the first time for me. But I'm excited to run Cryptocurriculon at Gamehole Con. I'm also going to be on 2 panels at Gamehole Con. One of them is called The Beautiful Mess of 5e, where we're going to explore this wonderful new platform that is 5e, the new open RPG platform that is 5e, and how we can take all different kinds of components from 5e from all different publishers and all different sources and build our own ideal 5e RPG at our own table. I'm also going to be on a top GM tips panel. I'm kind of hosting this panel. We have some exciting guests that are going to be there, and we're going to talk about what some of the best tips that GMs can hang on to, but also what are the best tips that GMs can share with other GMs to help our games run well. This is right up my alley. Obviously, I'm very excited to do that. I wanted to talk about the 5e Artisanal Database Combat Tracker. So the 5e Artisanal Database is a downloadable and hosted web-based set of tools for you to work with 5e. It includes multiple rule sets, searchable rule sets, available both in HTML and Markdown. So if you want Markdown versions to drop into your Obsidian or stuff like that, they're available in Markdown. It includes other 5e resources like the Lazy GM's resource document and the Lazy GM's monster resource document. Those are all of this material is available under Creative Commons licenses. So not only can we use it here in the tool, but you can actually use it for other published stuff as well. It has databases with thousands of entries for monsters, spells, and magic items, a bunch of digital tools, including dice rollers and counter calculators, quick monster stats, point buy calculator, token makers, map annotators, and more. Bunch of different generators for treasure and other random stuff. This is all available to patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to the link, and then from the link, you can literally click a download, and it downloads a zip file that has the entire application that can run in a browser without any other dependencies directly in your browser. One of the tools which I have talked about in the past, but I want to talk about it again because I'm finding it so significantly useful, is the combat tracker. I published a video last week about text files and how much I like using text files for online play. And the reason why is that text files are super ubiquitous. Text editors are all over the place. And you don't have to ever worry about them breaking down. You don't have to worry about the business model for text editors changing. Text editors are just a great way, and you can do things like handling initiative and tracking hit points done to damage done to monsters and tracking relative positioning for things like Theater of the Mind. You can do all of that in a text file. You can track what the marching order is, who's carrying the light. There's all kinds of stuff you can do in a text file. And I was like, it's going to be really hard for a tool to beat text files as far as simplicity and ease of use. But the combat tracker, when it comes to combat tracking, does so. And I'll give you an example. I was running a game on Friday night, 2 nights ago, and we ended in the middle of a battle. And I could just click the export JSON button of this combat tracker. I'm jumping to this feature because I'm going to show it, so that I could save the state of that battle, and then I can pull up that battle again later by importing it. And I'm going to do that right now. So I click import, and I saved my JSON file to my Obsidian vault, so I had it handy in campaigns, and this was my Black Cathedral game, and I have a campaign support, and bang. This shows me the current state of the battle because we ended in the middle of the fight. The reason why is they are facing Amuel. Amuel is one of the 2 heads of Demogorgon. The other one, and then a very quick thing for the campaign is one head has entrapped the other head. There was 2 battles going on between the 2 heads of Demogorgon, and one of them won, and through winning, put a big mask that feeds a hallucinogenic gas to the other head so that Amuel can actually control things. And the characters are fighting him. So the neat thing about the combat tracker is I can do everything. If you notice, I've got the characters Radon, Amuel, or Radon, Voxy, Eldrox, Zafri, Helm, and Chartreuse. I also have zones, and I've listed the zones right next to the characters. So I know who's in the black pool, who's in the gaping maw, what's going on. I have the armor classes and current hit points of the monsters in here. Hopefully my players aren't looking at this. You don't want to look at this because you'll see it. So I can track damage that's done. You can do things, I gotta remember to change this, but I could do things like if they do 40 damage to the Deep Scion Priest A, I can say minus 40. I can type in minus 40 and it does it. I can also do plus 40 and it goes right back up again. You can also use the minus and plus ones if you have only so much damage that you want to do. You can, of course, delete the monsters from the list if you want. There's a turn order tracker to kind of remind you about where they are. You can either load monsters from the database, the existing database. For example, I could do, let's add a Balor, right? If I want to add a Balor, and you can see I'm going to add the 5.2 Balor. And let's say I'll add 2 of them, and we'll do them. They're at initiative. It pulled the initiative automatically, and I add 2 Balors, and it shows up. In this case, it's got a little stats button, so I can go to click the stats, and it shows me the stats of the Balor directly in it. So that's really handy. And that's because the Balors are in the database already. But if they're not, like Amuel, you just type the data in that you need. So that can work really well. The other thing is all of these are editable. So I can go in here, and instead of Deep Scion Priest A, I could say this one has strange antenna and this one has bulbulous eyes. You can rename things. You can add information to each line. So, for example, you can see that I put zones next to each of them. It, of course, orders everything in initiative. You can change initiative. That's clickable as well. If I wanted to move one of these guys from the 8 to an 18, I can just type in 18 and it moves them up. I can move it back to 8 and it drops it back down again, keeps everything in order. Super handy tool. And, I mean, one would hope that I made a tool that I would want to use. And in fact, I did make a tool that I want to use. Another cool factor is the copy text version of it. grabs a markdown version of the initiative without all of the stats so that you can paste it into Discord to show players what the initiative is. So that way you can actually share what the current state of initiative, positioning, you can kind of store all of that stuff, and just by clicking copy text and paste it into Discord, you can paste the markdown version into Discord or whatever chat tool you happen to be using. So the combat tracker is just one of the many tools that you get for getting the 5e Artisanal database, which is a feature for patrons of Sly Flourish. It is a very handy tool. I find myself using it a lot. There's a few tools I use in the Artisanal database all the time. One of them, which is an external tool, is the Dyson Commercial Map Gallery. I use that pretty much anytime I'm grabbing a dungeon map. That's what I use. So I have all these different treasure generators and other generators that I use all the time when I'm using the 5e Artisanal database. So very cool tool. I wanted to share it. I wanted to point out that one particular tool. And if you like the 5e Artisanal database, if you want a copy of it for yourself, both self-hostable, you can download it. You can host it on your own internal web server for yourself. You can also run it just directly in a browser on your local machine. It does not work. There is no mobile version of it. You can run the website in a mobile browser and it works totally fine. And if you have a private web server you can reach from your mobile phone, you can do that. I do not have an app, unfortunately. I would love to have a standalone app, but I do not have a standalone app for it, unfortunately. But I have the rest, and it's available to patrons of Sly Flourish. You can pick that up. Please check it out. I have a couple Kickstarters I wanted to talk about today. The first is Allies and Enemies for Shadowdark. This is done by my friend Jeff Stevens. I've worked with Jeff Stevens on other projects of his, and we have a joint project that we did for the DMs Guild a while back. Jeff is a fantastic guy and a wonderful creator, wonderful producer of awesome RPG products, and he is putting out a very reasonable Allies and Enemies digital book for Shadowdark. So if you're looking for NPCs, good guy and bad guy NPCs, 50 different NPCs with art, and some of them have included a new magic item and piece of gear for each of them, some detailed layers, not generated by AI, built with contributing writers, and a very reasonable price. $7 gets you access to the PDF and a print code so that you can go get a print-on-demand version for cost. So very cool product. $13 gets you both the PDF and a code to print a print-on-demand copy that you can download yourself or that you can mail to yourself through DriveThruRPG. $7 if you want the PDF, or $7 if you want the print code separately, plus a bunch of different virtual tabletop versions. Very cool. I always love the stuff that Jeff comes out with, and I think it's a pretty neat idea to have a book of NPCs, a small book of NPCs that you can drop into your Shadowdark game. So looks really cool. Some good samples of like what it looks like, what the layout is going to look like, following the very typical Shadowdark style. Looks really neat, and an opportunity to pick up other products from Jeff Stevens. So that is the Jeff Stevens Allies and Enemies book of NPCs for Shadowdark. Another Kickstarter that got my attention is the Hall of Horrors. Hall of Horrors is a bestiary of horrible monsters for either 5e or Daggerheart or Candela Obscura. This project, Hall of Horrors, a bestiary for Daggerheart, D&D 5e, and a Candela Obscura, is made by Echidna Design. The two creators partnered together. A writer and an artist worked together hand in hand to come up with interesting stat blocks and monster concepts that you can drop into your horror-based RPG. Looks really interesting stuff. They have published on DMs Guild previously. They have a couple of other Kickstarters that they have run. Here, for example, is a preview of another product they had made, a Daggerheart version of the Red Death Party, which is sort of based on the Mask of the Red Death. So you can get an idea of what the design looks like, what the physical design of this product looks like, the kind of art style that they have. Very unique art style. I think looks really, really neat. And an interesting to focus on multiple different RPGs, 5e, Daggerheart, and Candela Obscura. I don't see a lot of stuff that's coming out for Candela Obscura. So looks really neat. And I wanted to show it off. Looked like a fun, independently produced product. So if you want the PDF version of this, it's about $18 for the PDF for each of the versions. So you decide whether or not you want it for 5e, or whether you want it for Candela Obscura, or whether you want it for Daggerheart. You can pick any of these. And then, of course, they have add-ons for previous products that they have created as well. So looks really interesting. I love the art style to it. I love the idea of the artist and the writer, the artist and writer working together hand in hand to kind of design the monsters and build the stat blocks for monsters for each of them. Definitely some grim stuff. They have a good like trigger warning section at the beginning, like, hey, there's going to be some creepy stuff in this. You want to be aware of that fact. But you can check it out. There are samples of their previous work, which you can click and find if you want to take a look at their design work and see if it is for you. I would definitely go and take a look at those free designs, and then if you are digging it, then here are the examples that the various samples that they have for work that they have done before. So that is the Hall of Horrors Bestiary for Daggerheart, D&D 5e, and Candela Obscura. A few weeks ago, a little while ago, I mentioned that Michelle and I, the two owners of the Sly Flourish Empire, have partnered with Let's Quest. Michelle and I used to run kind of an after-school sponsorship program. It was fun to do, and we really enjoyed it, and a lot of schools got a benefit out of it, but we are not an actual non-profit entity to be able to do things like this. And so we wanted to partner with a group that does do things like this, and we partnered with Let's Quest. So the resources that we typically would have put towards the after-school programs that we ran, we instead gave to Let's Quest. And I wanted to mention Let's Quest again because I am hoping that people out there will reach out to them. It is both a fantastic place to donate money and resources to, and also if you are running after-school programs, please check them out. Let's Quest, they have a contact section here where you can contact them about what you're looking for, how many people you have in your program and things like that, and they get resources to you. If you have used Let's Quest, I would love to hear how it worked out. Please email support@slyflourish.com with your stories and experience having worked with Let's Quest. I would love to hear how it's working out. I'd love to hear how your program is going and what kind of stuff that you got for it and how all of that has worked out. I would be very interested to hear more. So please, if you have used Let's Quest, please let us know how that whole experience worked out. They focus on both physical and digital materials more so than giving direct funding to the groups. So that's something to consider. And I want to both point them out so that you know that this is a resource you have available to you for after school RPG programs for schools and libraries, both as a place for you to donate resources to if you have the means, and as a place if you are running programs like that you can reach out to for materials to be able to run your game. I'd be very interested to hear how that is going. So please contact us. Please email support@slyflourish.com and let us know your experience with Let's Quest. I'm very, very eager to hear how it's going. Fantastic program. Michelle and I often receive email from people. This is a public service announcement. We're going to have a little public service announcement here. From folks who have lost their digital versions of the products they bought from us. And we are more than happy to replace those products. When people lose their products, we want to make sure that you're happy with it. We are usually it's very quick for us to turn around and offer back digital versions of stuff that people have lost through hard drive crashes or migrating from one machine to another, or simply couldn't keep track of it and the file got lost. But I wanted to bring up, so I have a vast collection of digital RPG products. I promote buying lots of digital RPG products on this show. I talk about humble bundles and bundles of holding, and those are fantastic ways to build up libraries of RPG products that you can use to inspire your own games, get ideas for games, get ideas about game mastering and everything like that. None of that is any good if you lose it, right? If you lose access to those products, then none of it is any good. And I feel like today, this is all about my feelings, I feel like today in a world where we're primarily operating in a mobile environment, we're using mobile phones, maybe we're using tablets and things like that, but we're not using desktop or laptops as much as we used to, that the concept of backing up our digital data is starting to get lost. And it shouldn't get lost because backing up your digital data is really important. So consider this a public service announcement that you can use to help you hang on to your digital products, because in my opinion, the preservation of our downloadable digital products is really important. You've heard me complain on my show all the time about D&D Beyond and the fact that the stuff that we buy in D&D Beyond, we're not actually buying. According to their own license agreement, we're not even buying it. And a lot of that is we cannot preserve it, right? We cannot keep it. You cannot make sure that you have it. But even for the stuff you can download, even for the PDFs that you can download, you're going to lose it if you don't have a way to make sure that it is backed up and that you can move it. This isn't going to be like a technical deep dive into the depths of different kinds of backup systems. I'm not going to recommend that you go set up a multi-drive Raspberry Pi network attached storage device in order to do it. I'm going to offer some practical tips for you to help preserve your digital material so that you don't lose it, because you cannot trust, as much as Michelle and I are totally happy to give people digital versions of their products, and many of the other publishers are. And if you have your stuff on DriveThruRPG, you can almost always go back to DriveThruRPG and download it again. I don't know about Humble. I think Humble Bundle and Bundle Holding. I don't know if you have an easy way of going and getting that stuff again. So that's the question. Like, I don't have it there, but you should still be backing up your own local copy, because if you don't, you could lose it. The companies could go away. The products could no longer be sold. There's lots of things that could happen. That means that once the company is no longer supporting it, you lose your version of it because your hard drive crashes, or you had it on your mobile phone and you'd switched phones and it didn't keep it there, or many, many different reasons. So we're going to talk about it today. So there is a concept in digital backups, which has been around for many years, called the 3-2-1 backup. I brought it up on this show. I've joked about it on this show. Make sure you have that in your 3-2-1 backup. A 3-2-1 backup is a general rule philosophy for backing up digital data. The 3-2-1 rule means that you have a copy of your data in 3 places on 2 different kinds of media, and one of them off-site. That's the 3-2-1. 3 places, 2 different kinds of media, one of them off-site. So an example, and I'm going to offer up different examples of how you could have your backup data. For example, I'm sitting on a MacBook Air right now. My primary machine is a MacBook Air. I also have an external spinning disk hard drive. I think it was $60 for a 2 terabyte hard drive. That's a spinning disk USB hard drive. So I have 2 different kinds of media there. I have the internal hard drive, which is, I think, SSD, onboard SSD hard drive that's wired onto the motherboard of the chip, I think. And I have a spinning disk, 2 different kinds of media, solid state and spinning disk. Those are the 2 different kinds of media. So so far I've got 2. I don't have the other one. I haven't mentioned the other one yet. And then I also use iCloud. Right. And I am paying for an increase to the amount of data that I can store in iCloud, so that it's enough so that my documents directory, which is on my MacBook Air, is also replicated on Apple iCloud. And that's because just being inside the Apple infrastructure and ecosystem makes it easy for me. The good news is I'm not trusting any one of those to survive. Right? I'm trusting that one of the 3 of them will survive. So in this case, I'm actually doing a 3-3-1 because it's 3 different kinds of media, right? It's offsite, cloud-based document store, onboard solid state drive, and a external spinning disk USB drive. So that's 3 different places. Whenever I put a new file on my machine, within an hour, it is backed up to the Time Machine drive that I've got. We'll talk about Time Machine. And a copy is immediately placed or uploaded to the cloud. So then I have it both in the cloud and locally and on a spinning disk. That is a 3-2-1 backup. That's an example of a 3-2-1 backup. I've got 3 copies of any new file that I put on my hard drive, or that I put in my documents directory, we'll talk about that, is in 3 places within an hour, right? Within an hour, it is up on iCloud. It is also sitting on my Time Machine drive, and it's on the main computer. And it means if any one of those fail, even if 2 of them fail, I still have the data in another place. So that's what a 3-2-1 backup is. A very basic 3-2-1 backup would be your primary machine, an external hard drive that you're backing up to, physically, a local drive, and some kind of cloud-based drive. Those are to me, that is kind of the easiest way to maintain a 3-2-1 backup, and I think is a good way to go. Now, let's say you just don't feel like managing an external drive. Honestly, as long as you're storing stuff in a cloud-based hard drive of some sort, you're probably okay. If you have your local machine and a cloud drive, you're probably okay. There's a higher risk there of losing one or the other, or it turns out that you replicated problems that you had on your local machine to the upper machine, and that, So 3-2-1 is still better. Having an external drive as well is still better. But if you really, if you take nothing from this and you don't want to do anything else, spring for the extra money. It's usually not much to increase the storage of whatever cloud drive provider you use. That could be Dropbox, that could be Google Drive, that could be Microsoft OneDrive, that could be iCloud, right? Those are probably the 4 biggest online providers. And then make sure that whatever drive you care about, the one that's holding your RPG products, is backed up to that external, that that cloud-based storage as well as locally. You don't want to trust only the cloud-based storage. You want to make sure it exists in both places, that you have it locally on your machine and in the cloud-based storage. You're probably okay. I think you should also go spend the $60 to buy an external hard drive and hook it up to your machine and set up some kind of regular backup system where it's also backing up to a local drive as well. So there are probably, I think realistically speaking, if we talk about Mac and Windows, we're talking about almost all desktop machines, right? Yes, there are Unix ones, and we'll talk about Unix ones here in a bit, but there's really not a lot of Unix machines out there. We shouldn't be too realistic. I myself run on a Mac. No, you don't have to email me. I hate Apple. I hate Apple as much as anybody, but I also like Mac hardware, and I've been using Apple hardware for many years now, and I'm not about to switch back to Windows. I also don't think switching back to Windows is actually improving my life at all. But I am on a Mac, and one really nice thing about a Mac is it has Time Machine built in. Time Machine is a really, really good file versioning and backup system. So what that means is I can plug a hard drive in. I can say, hey, back up to Time Machine, and it is backing up data. Now, the other thing it is doing versioning of that backup, which means it will be keeping track of snapshots of the files as they change. So, for example, if I alter something and then realize, oh my God, that alteration I made was bad, I can go back to a previous time. That's why it's called Time Machine. I can go back to a previous time and find an older version of that file. I have actually done this recently where I had overwritten some stuff or deleted some text from a file that I wanted, and I went back and I was able to recover that text. Doesn't matter too much with your PDFs, but you could have a circumstance, for example, where you're cleaning out your RPG library and deleting some old RPG files that you don't need anymore because you thought you had other copies of it or you didn't like it, and then you realize later, oh man, I really wish I hadn't deleted that. You can go back to your file versioning system and you can pull that up. Windows has a system called File History. You're going to have to do some of your own Googling and your own web searching to learn more about file history, but Windows 11 machines now have a way for you to preserve your file history on an external drive. I think it's if you go into your control panel and stuff like that and do a search for file history, you'll find an ability to say, hey, I want to store my file history for a particular directory on this external drive. And it will set up that external drive so that as you're making changes to files, it is keeping track of those changes on that other drive in a Time Machine-like way. It is not doing a full hard drive backup so that if you have to restore your entire hard drive from it, that's a different process, but it is a good way to preserve a library of, say, a big pile of RPG products, which is really what we're talking about here. So that's called File History. For the Unix nerds, if you are a Linux nerd, if for some reason you are the kind of person who is running stuff on a Raspberry Pi, I, for example, have a Raspberry Pi over there, you can use a tool called rsync. Rsync is a very popular Unix-based tool. It's been around forever that syncs files between multiple drives. It will do it locally, it will do it remote, and it's a good way to say like, hey, I want to make sure, for example, on my Raspberry Pi, I have two external SSD hard drives, one of which backs up to the other one, I think once a day. So every day it runs rsync and says, hey, anything that was on this one, make sure it's over on that one. So I have rsync set up between the two of those. That's getting really nerdy, and almost, I think very few of you are going to worry about rsync. And if you were the kind of person to worry about rsync, you probably already know about rsync. I probably don't need to tell you much about rsync, but it's really powerful. It is one that I've got running on my other machine over there, which is also a 3-2-1 backup system on its own, right? So I have two completely separate 3-2-1 backup systems, but my documents directory, which is sitting on my Mac, is synced over to my Raspberry Pi once a week. So that way I literally have 6 copies of that to 2 different cloud providers on 5 different kinds of media. So I've got a lot going on because I have stuff that is absolutely vital to me, which is like the books that I've written. All of the material that's required to build those books again, like the InDesign files, are critical. I can't just go to DriveThruRPG and buy them again, right? They will not exist. So I need to have absolute backups of those. So I have backups of those as well. There's another component to this, which is offline backups. Now, offline backups, you're getting into some kind of crazy, conspiracy theory level stuff here too, but it's not without precedent. And the idea is to have a backup of your data that is not connected to the internet and isn't connected to any machine that is connected to the internet. Mostly corporations need to worry about this because of ransomware. Ransomware is where evil villains come to your hard drive, they encrypt everything on the hard drive, and then force you to pay like $2,000 or $3,000 in Bitcoin to decrypt the data that they've encrypted. In theory, if you've got some Mr. Robot level hackers that decided to come after you, they in theory could, and they managed to get onto your machine, they in theory could encrypt your local drives, your backup drive, and your remote drive, and then you'd have to decrypt all of that. A safety measure for that is to have a copy of your data that is actually offline. And here's an easy way to handle that situation. And what I do is when I said that I bought a Time Machine SSD, a 2 terabyte external, not SSD, spinning disk hard drive, 2 terabyte spinning disk hard drive, I bought 2. And what I do is every 3 months, I unplug this one, I make sure it's backed up, then I unplug this one, I stick it up in a safe, and then I bring down the one that I had in the safe and plug it in, and then start using that one as my Time Machine drive. And that way I have 2 different Time Machine drives that I swap out every 3 months. So that means that as long as it's within 3 months, I have an external drive that has all of my data on it that I care about, so that I can get that data as well. And rotating drives serves a couple of purposes. One is that you have a nice external drive that cannot be reached by the internet, and it's not even just ransomware that could get it to it. There's other things that could happen because if all of your backups are online, what if, for example, you make a catastrophic change to one of them and then the change is backed up to all of your backup drive because it was so fast? If you have versioning and things like that, you're probably in a better state. But sometimes something could go wrong with all of the versions that you have online. Having a totally offline backup means you've got one copy that you know nothing can happen to, no matter what kind of craziness is going on with your own physical machine. And the difficulty is really not hard, where all you have to do is have 2 drives and you flop them in and out. Now, there's a cost, right? You're buying 2 hard drives that you have to keep up to date. But I think it's worth it. I mean, if you think about the kind of material that you're preserving, generally speaking, you want to preserve that stuff. I think that there is a value in thinking about what you're backing up. I had heard some people, and I've talked to people where they're like, well, I have 10 terabytes of stuff. And you're like, what in the hell do you have that's 10 terabytes? And it's like every home movie of my kid that I've ever published and stuff like that. I've got 1 million photos, or I've ripped every DVD that I've ever bought in my life. So I've got HD versions of all of the movies I've ever owned in my library. You need to decide which data you think really needs to be preserved and which doesn't. And I'll give you my little clue. If it's something I can buy again, I'm not too worried about it. I still think if like in the case of RPG products, I think all my RPG products together, I can actually find out. Let's find out how much data I've got. So I just checked, and I have 100 gigabytes of RPG products. And the 100 gigabytes, I actually surprised myself when I found that out. I'm like, 100 gigabytes of RPG products? That's crazy. 100 gigs is a lot. But in hard drive space, $60 gave me 2 terabytes. Right? And a lot of times you can pay like $4 to $6 a month or whatever. I don't know how much it costs for different cloud storage providers, but generally you get like a terabyte or 2 of storage. So even 100 gigabytes is pretty easily managed, right? It sounds like a lot of data. It is a lot of data, but it's pretty easily managed. And the question is, when you look at the actual size of the files you have, that's when, and you think about how hard it would be to recover that data some other way. That can tell you what data you actually should be backing up. Like I as an example, I have a very big music library that I like to stream around my house, and I like to listen to music. But music I can go get again, right? I can probably, if it was catastrophic, I could get it again. I'm still backing it up, but I don't have to back it up on my local hard drive with quite the same amount of rigor that I want to back up things like my InDesign files, because I can get it again if I need to. It's still in a 3-2-1 backup. It's sitting on the Raspberry Pi, and the Raspberry Pi is backed up in a 3-2-1 backup. So I still backed it up enough. But I don't have to worry about it quite as much as I have to worry about some of the other stuff where it's smaller amount of data, but much more critical to me. So the 2 factors you want to think about are how big is the data and how critical is the data. I am betting if you think real hard, it's unlikely that your biggest data is also your most critical data. I bet you your critical data can be a little bit smaller. Right. And also, when you get up to like the terabyte or 2 terabyte level, the cost for you to back up the data is actually not too terrible, but it's not zero. And I think one of the reasons why people aren't doing it is like, I don't want to pay an extra $5 a month for, 2 terabytes of storage to be able to store stuff in the cloud. That's too much. I don't like paying. And you're like, well, losing your data could be worse. So I think it's worth it. I think, you don't have to bag, I think I'm paying for 2 different cloud providers, three different cloud providers. You don't need to have 3 different cloud providers. You can just pick one, right? Pick the one that's probably closest to the kind of data that you've got or the kind of machine that you have, and just squint and pay the money and have the data backed up to your cloud version that way. So when you do this, this is a great way of preserving your digital data, right? And I feel like it's important to back up your digital data because, and I can tell you, as a publisher, we get a lot of emails from people who talk about their hard drive crashes, who talk about losing the data, who talk about other kind of catastrophic things that occurred. And like I said, we're more than happy to send those files again, but not everybody is. And sometimes those files simply don't exist anywhere else. You cannot trust websites like DriveThruRPG to maintain your PDFs for you forever, because they just won't. So you want to make sure that you have a system where you're backing up your data on your own, in your own environment, so that you know that the data that you paid for, these RPG products, these digital products that you paid for, that you're going to be able to have them well after the company is no longer concerned about maintaining them. We talk a lot about adventures when we're running our RPGs. An adventure is kind of any sort of mission or quest that the characters go on that kind of is the crux of the RPGs that we play. And there are actually several different adventure types. I read a really good book written by Robin Laws called Adventure Crucible. I will link to that in the show notes. Adventure Crucible was the first book I read that really kind of talked about different adventure types. And I spent more time thinking about adventure types. And I actually wrote a series of articles on Sly Flourish about different adventure types. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about why thinking about adventure types is actually a really useful thing. Like why do we want to categorize and characterize different types of adventures? What value is there in that? Is this a completely academic exercise, or is there actually some value in there? I think that there is actually some value in there. So I mentioned Adventure Crucible, and these are different adventure types that I reviewed and talked about and wrote about on the Sly Flourish website. These are the different adventure types that I sort of broke down and categorized. Dungeon crawls, infiltrations and heists, investigations and mysteries, overland travel and exploration, missions and quest chains, defense, roleplay and intrigue, combat, and mashups and the undefined. Why does it matter that we break up these different adventure types? And I think it matters for a few reasons. One of them is when you are running a particular type of adventure, if you're running one of these things, the process that you go through to both prep your game and run your game are different than when you're running the other adventure types. If you know that you have a dungeon crawl coming up, you know that the way that you're going to prep your dungeon crawl, the kind of things that you want to focus your time on, even if you're using things like the 8 steps, which of the 8 steps you use and what kind of information you put in those 8 steps is going to be very different if you're running a dungeon crawl or if you're running a roleplay and intrigue kind of adventure. So it's helpful to have this breakdown of the understanding of what you do with one that is different from what you do with another. The other thing that the adventure types help with is they show you what kind of adventures work well in our role-playing games. There are some kinds of adventures and some kind of adventure types and some kind of quest types that don't tend to work particularly well, even though they work well in things like fiction. And I've brought these up before. Things like the all or nothing collection quest. The idea that you are going to collect 5 things before another group collects 5 things in order to accomplish some goal. The problem with it is if one group gets one of those things, the other group is completely thwarted unless they get it. Think about like Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Hunt for the Lost Ark, right? There's all these kind of things that are going on, and there's all these sort of things that happen in the story, like Toad having the imprint of the medallion on his hand, which allows the Nazis to go figure out what's going on, but not everything that they needed. The story kind of went that way, but your RPG might not go that way. And that's why you have things like alternate keys, like the 3 of 5 keys collection quest and things like that. And that's why you have missions and quest chains as an example. So it's valuable to understand these different adventure types because these adventure types work, right? These are adventure types that GMs have run for 50 years in many circumstances. And when we consider them as a type, we're able to refine down what running that adventure type is like, what works well, what doesn't work well, what are the problems that we could run into if we're running these adventure types, how do we do our prep, and what is the process that we use when we're actually running our game. The other advantage of adventure types is, like the 8 steps of Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, they give us a comfortable framework. If we know we're running an overland exploration and travel game, an adventure that's based on overland exploration and travel. If we know what the process is like to prep and run that kind of game, now we know what we need to do when we're sitting down to our prep. One of the things I think paralyzes a lot of GMs is the open-ended nature of role-playing games, and the open-ended nature of what we're going to run at the table is so wide, it can paralyze us. Oh my God, I don't know what to prep. I don't know what to do. Anything could happen. What do I do? But the minute you say, no, this is just an overland exploration and travel adventure, you're like, okay. So we're going to have things like character roles for travel. We're going to have things like locations they might run into while they're going along the way. We're going to have things like weather. We're going to have things like, all the different kinds of roles about distance of creatures to us and things like that. There are different things you can do when you're running travel. And when you know them, it helps break away some of that fuzziness and the paralysis of having too many options and too many choices. When you know what kind of adventure you're running, you know what kind of process you have. Now, I'm offering up these types of adventures, or these adventure types, and in each of the articles, which you can find, you'll find them, they'll be linked in the show notes. I am offering things like what do you do to prep them, what you do to run them, and what pitfalls they run into, and what you can get around those pitfalls. I kind of summarize that in each of the articles. I don't think that these are absolutely the right ones. I'm not saying that these are the only adventure types that are out there. I've spent some time kind of looking into all different sort of both fantasy RPGs, but RPGs in general, mostly the standard sort of D20-ish, one GM and a bunch of players sort of game. So, does this work for things like Fiasco? No. Does it work for, Vampire the Masquerade? I don't know. But it works for a lot of RPGs. And I don't claim that it is absolutely the right one. You might have your own adventure type that you like, and you might understand the style of that adventure type. If you think it is common enough that lots of GMs run it this way, I'd love to hear what your adventure type is. And you can answer those questions of what separates it from other adventure types? How do you prep it differently? How do you run it differently? What kind of pitfalls you run into? And how do you get around those pitfalls when you're running them? I'd be interested to hear that. But I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all of all of the adventure types. But I think that, like the 8 steps, having some kind of framework can help us get our hands around the kind of game that we're running. I do believe that a lot of the time, the kinds of adventures we run are actually mashups of different adventure types. For example, very shortly, in about an hour, I'm going to be running a game. And in that game, I'm going to have some roleplay and intrigue up front. Then I'm going to have some overland exploration and travel. And then I'm going to get into a dungeon crawl. And I have components from all 3 of those in my prepped. Like I prepped the game an hour earlier, just before I did the show, and I prepped kind of all those pieces of it. But I knew about the kinds of things I was going to need and the kind of information and how I was going to break up my 8 steps to include things like, I want to have one interesting location that the characters travel to when they're doing their travel. And I am going to ask them things like the roles that they're going to take on when they are going on this exploration. And then I got into the dungeon crawl and said, okay, now I also want to know, like, what's going on with the dungeon crawl? What are the chambers like? What is the map like? What monsters might be in there? And then I prepped that part of it too. So a lot of times we're mashing up the concepts from these different adventure types when we're actually running it. That's why we have a mashups or the undefined, which are sort of, there are adventure types that don't really fit the others, or there are adventure types that are a mashup of multiple adventure types. So I think that is definitely something to consider too, but it's still handy for us to understand these different adventure types. It's still useful, I think, to frame the different kinds of adventures we have so that we understand how do we prep them differently than the others? How do we run them? What are some of the techniques we use to run them differently than the others? And what kinds of problems might we run into running this adventure type typically? And how do we avoid those problems? I think are all worthy discussions. So you can find a link in the show notes to the first of the adventure types article that I wrote. I'm definitely interested in your feedback on are there types of adventures that you think are common that don't fall into those categories? I'm definitely interested in feedback on that whole kind of thing. But I wanted to talk about just adventure types in general. I think over weeks to come, I'll probably start talking about some of these adventure types and we can dive into them, like what makes running a dungeon crawl different than running an infiltration and heist. Are they the same? Are they not the same? What are some of the similarities between the two, but what separates them? I think we'll get into topics like that in the future, but I wanted to have kind of the initial conversation of why I think it is useful to define different adventure types so that we know what it takes to prep them, to run them, and to what kind of problems we might run into and what we can do to avoid those problems. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, I start a new thread. I actually just started the October to December 2025 thread for the Patreon Q&A. Every month, patrons can come and ask RPG-related questions on that thread, and every week, I go through all of those questions and I answer them all. So every question gets answered. And then some of those I bring here to the show so we can talk more about it. Adam B says, the players are going into a vault soon, and I want a more unique sort of challenge, but share your disdain of puzzles at the table. I'm interested and eager to make a complex trap from Xanathar's Guide, as they seem to capture the core D&D gameplay much better. Have you used one before, and was it fun at the table, if so? I actually don't remember what Xanathar's had for the complex trap. Let's take a look. So in Xanathar's Guide, they have these examples of complex traps. And what's interesting is these are actually follow somewhat similar to the kind of complex traps that 4th edition D&D had, where there was usually multiple things going on and the characters had to kind of interact with or deal with multiple different threats for a single trap. I love the idea. And I think a lazy way to handle this thing is to, if you have a simple trap table, I've got them in the Lazy GM resource document. They're also available in the Lazy DM's workbook. You can roll multiple times on a single table in order to figure out what trap you have. In the 5e Artisanal database, I have a trap generator that does exactly this. It throws a couple of adjectives like necrotic or silencing with a couple of traps like snares and alarms, and then a trigger like ironbound chest. So I have like sleep-inducing swinging glaives and arcane bear traps triggered by a jeweled skull. Now this one is, they're just random tables mashed together. The idea is to kind of give you a general idea of some thoughts that you can have for complex traps. And then what you can have is multiple different DCs or multiple different things to deal with. I think a big factor in this is thinking about how the trap works in the world. And this is true with puzzles as well. If you're going to add this kind of thing, before you get into like what the mechanics are, and you can do things like Blades in the Dark style clocks, where you might have a trap that's escalating, and as the characters are doing things, you can have like, each failed tick ticks the clock until something catastrophic happens. You could have 2 different clocks where they have to succeed so many times before they fail so many times. That's sort of like the skill challenge style that 4th edition D&D had. You have all those mechanics that you can do, and different tables for the amount of damage they do. You can use words like necrotic and sleep-inducing and icy and oozy to kind of add different sort of conditions to what's going on. But start by thinking about what this thing is in the world. Think about the fiction. What are the you can use tables to give you ideas first. And then from those ideas, say like, what are arcane bear traps like? Like, what is that like? And if you imagine like, well, what if you imagine that the bear trap is sort of a giant set of jaws that kind of burrow up out of the ground, but they're made out of a force thing, right? It's force damage, right? It's arcane energy that's doing it. And sleep-inducing swinging glaives, right? These like poison glaives that swing out, and if they hit you, you fall asleep, and then they will dice you to death while you gently fall into a dreamscape world. That you can kind of take these ideas and build from them, but think about what they are in the world first and how they operate in the world first before you get into like, what are the mechanics? What are the DCs? What kind of checks need to be done? How many successes, how many failures, and that sort of thing. When you have an understanding of what this trap or, this complex trap is like in the world, it's usually easier to bring the mechanics and lay the mechanics on top of it. That once you understand what it operates like in the world, first of all, you can also ask yourself like, well, how would this, is it totally bypassable if they cast Levitate, right? If they cast Levitate, do they get around the whole thing? And is that okay? Or did the trap makers know about Levitate and they did things like a hallway that cast Dispel Magic on people, right? Like, what are the things that you can add into it based on the challenge of the trap in the world, and then kind of think about what the mechanics are. So that's definitely my recommendation is I think mixing, if you want ideas, mixing random traps together and then mix them with other things, conditions like necrotic and ice and lightning and whatever, so that you can come up with some kind of crazy ideas. Again, the 5e Artisanal database has a random table for it. Lazy DM's Companion and Lazy DM's Workbook also have ideas for traps in there so that you can roll on multiple tables and get ideas for what your complex traps are like. Then you can use tools like clocks to track successes over failures if you want to. But most of all, I'd say think about what the obstacle looks like in the world and how it operates and why it operates that way. before you start to worry too much about the mechanics. Unfirth says, how do you keep all the different rule sets straight in your head? And as a corollary, how do you learn a new rule set? Both sides of the question so that you aren't constantly fumbling through your rule books at the table. Since I've been a follower, you've run 4 versions of 5e. No matter how well they mesh, they seem like they're different enough to me. You've run Shadowdark, and you've referred to several other RPGs you've run as campaigns. And you've done them at the same time, or at least in the same week. How do you keep them straight? In my youth, I played AD&D and DM'd Rolemaster. Recently, I finished running a Rolemaster campaign, and I'm looking for my next OSR, Traveler, Downcrawl, Shadowdark. As I'm looking at them, all the rules and mechanics are running together in a confused mess that looks more like a black pudding than a rule set. I can't imagine with dedicated study running one of them, but not 2 or more. How do you do it? My number one trick is I don't care that much. So I don't need to know every single nuance of the rules. Instead, if I'm running it, I also ask and depend upon my players to have an understanding of the rules as well. Now, this gets in the idea that your players need to be on board with the rule set you're playing, or else they're not going to want to spend the time to read the rules either. But if they are, then generally speaking, they can also read the rules, and then together you can kind of work through what the rules are. Many of the systems that I have run are at 5e's level of complexity or simpler. Most of the RPGs, a lot of RPGs that are coming out these days recognize that there's lots of other RPGs out there and that not a lot of people, I don't know if this is exactly true, but I don't think a lot of people are really looking for more complex rule sets. You have rule sets like Pathfinder 2 and Pathfinder, those are pretty complex. I don't know a lot of people that are looking for more complex rule sets than that. Level Up Advanced 5e, for example, was a 5e version that definitely delved more into complexity, and it kind of bounced off my players and I, right? We didn't like the extra complexity as much, and what ended up happening is we ended up defaulting back to traditional 5e rules rather than adding a lot of the other stuff that Level Up Advanced 5e had. We realized like late into the game that there were rules that we just never did. Like we're not doing anything about weapon breakage. We're not using a lot of the masterwork weapons, masterwork item kind of ideas that they have in there. We fail a lot on the idea of the kind of skill mastery system that Level Up Advanced 5e has. We just kind of don't need it that much. And then a lot of other systems like Shadowdark is a really simple system. Right? Like Shadowdark is really basic. I don't think it's terribly, I've seen new people pick up the mechanics for Shadowdark really quickly. People brand new to RPGs who were totally got on board with Shadowdark really, really easily because it really simplified the rules a lot and focused on the rules that matter for the atmosphere of Shadowdark. If you look at games like Cairn, they're pretty simple. Dragonbane, pretty simple stuff. There's stuff there and you're going to spend some time learning it. But it's pretty straightforward. A lot of these systems that I'm running are straightforward. A Cypher system, which I ran for my Numenera campaign, also a very straightforward, simple system. One of the reasons I loved it so much was that on the GM side, it was really, really easy to run. Like you didn't have to keep a lot of rules in your head to be able to run a Cypher system. Not quite as much on the player side, so. The player side had a lot of weird complications that we thought kind of got in the way of the game. So that's a big one. Depend upon your players. Right? That you and your players are going together. The other advantage of that is when you are asking your players about rules, everyone at the table recognizes that the GM is not opposed to the players, that you are not some kind of protected group from the players, that you don't have some sort of authority that they don't have. If you're all working with the rules, then you're all playing the same game together. And I think there's a real value in that. I think there's a real value in asking your players for help to manage the rules of the game that you're playing. I think that works really well as well. A last thing I will offer, like in the case of Dragonbane, I was very excited about Dragonbane. And one way that I did is I ran the solo game. I built characters on my own. I've been running my own little solo campaign with Dragonbane so that I'm learning the rules on my own before I start bringing it to players to learn. And that has been a good way for me to internalize rules. Not every game has a solo mode, but there's a lot of stuff you can do. Like you can run combat. You know, I don't know if I quite did this with Daggerheart, but my wife and I, for example, played a one-on-one Daggerheart game just to kind of understand the mechanics of Daggerheart, right? We wanted to see like what it was actually like to play. And we played it and it was really fun. And we learned a lot from that. So one-on-one games, solo games, building characters, that can teach you a lot. You're running your own combat. Like if you just go through and be like, an assumption that the game is kind of combat focused, you could ask yourself like, let me just run some monsters against this character that I made and see what happens, right? And you can kind of learn a lot of the rules that way. So I found that really worked out. Hippo37 says, I'm a beginner DM with about 30 sessions under my belt. My table is getting close to finishing Ghost of Saltmarsh campaign. For Ghost of Saltmarsh and for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, I was relying a lot on the campaign-specific prep advice on your website. The ideas there have been awesome and have enriched our game. Next, I want to homebrew an Eberron campaign. However, I can't help but feel that the bar is now set high. I feel like it's difficult to reach the same level of creative and cool ideas given by pre-made adventures or your ideas, etc., and I'm a bit worried that a campaign I homebrew is not going to be as good. Is this all mostly in my head, worrying about trying to run fun and engaging games for my players? Yes. It is mostly in your head. I joke. Michelle and I were talking about this question on our walk right before, and she said, that was her answer. Yeah, yep, it's in your head. But no, there's also other aspects too. One of the reasons that we like published adventures and like published material in general, and I promote the use of published material, is that you are getting a depth of the material that you yourself typically wouldn't be able to come up with just on your own. That's particularly true with campaign material. Adventure material, I'm not sure is quite the same. A lot of times, adventures are sort of pre-structured in ways that they offer a lot of material that you can use, but they also kind of predefine how the game is going to go. Waterdeep Dragon Heist was an example of that. There are sections of Waterdeep Dragon Heist that I really, really liked. And then there are sections like the whole giant chase sequence that I really didn't. And it's because the chase had to work a certain way for it to operate. And I was like, it even has like a paragraph about how the MacGuffin that you're chasing, like if you get it too early, like the MacGuffin tries to escape you. This physical item tries to leave your possession just to make sure that the plot stays on track. So there's a lot of advantage in the flexibility of your homebrew adventures that you do not get when you use published adventures. But there's a way to get the best of both. And it depends on kind of how much you're willing to spend on money and on time digging into other stuff. And for Eberron is a really good example. One thing is I definitely recommend picking up Eberron Rising from the Last War, the campaign book, and really spending some time with it. Look at like those main things that define Eberron as being different than other campaigns. Things like the Last War, things like the technology level of Eberron, things like the noble houses, things like the various empires of Eberron. Get a good feeling for those. And that way you can use those to kind of flavor the sort of traditional adventures that you would run when you're running other kinds of adventures. There's a lot of value in those campaign books that can help you flavor the traditional adventures that you have. But if you feel like, and particularly if you feel like, oh, I've run 30 sessions, but I'm pretty new to GMing, I don't have all of this understanding of all the different kinds of adventures that can run, running heists versus running all the adventure types I was talking about earlier, right? Heists versus investigations and mysteries versus dungeon crawls versus overland travel. If you don't really have a good feel for all of those, the one way to get them is to go read other adventures. And you don't have to run them, but you can take ideas from them. And there's a lot of good Eberron adventures. So there's a lot of published 3rd edition Eberron adventures you might take a look at. And you can do some searching online to see like which ones you should be paying attention to. There were a lot of 4th edition adventures for Eberron, and there are a lot of 5th edition Eberron adventures that were made for organized play programs. So an example was there was a campaign called Oracle of War that was made for an organized play program for Eberron. And it was really neat. It was sort of set in like a frontier town on the edge of the big desolate wasteland. And there's a bunch of different adventures in there. You could go take a look at those, even if you just sort of read the summaries of those adventures, which you can like read for free on the DM's Guild. You can get an idea like what is the crux of it. That gives you an idea about different kinds of adventures you can run. So mostly it's about getting good ideas for what kinds of adventures you would want to be able to run in Eberron, and then giving yourself kind of the flexibility and the freedom to run those kinds of adventures. But I think there's a real value, and a lot of GMs, the only way they play is homebrewing their own stuff. And it goes fine. I would focus on the advantages that you have running homebrew adventures, which is building stuff tailored for the characters, letting it flex and flow depending on the direction that the players go. I would still focus on the next adventure you're going to run more so than the larger campaign. It's okay to have like a good campaign seed, like what's a good campaign thread? Are you going to have a big battle against the rise of the Warforged? Are you going to, I did a whole one about a group that was trying to find out what the weapon was that was used during the morning, and they want to do it again, right? There was lots of stuff that you can think like, what's the main campaign arc? And you can get that by reading the book and just letting your ideas sort of flow while you're reading the book. But really, you want to focus on what's the next adventure you're going to run, and then what makes it kind of unique and interesting for Eberron. That's what I would focus on. But the best way to sort of give yourself information could be looking at what other adventures had done. What are the paths those other adventures took? Which ones resonate with you? Like, one nice thing about breaking away from published adventures is you don't feel this drive that you've got to run the next one. Right? You don't have to run anything. You can run anything you want. So you get to pick the stuff that you think, that resonates with me. That sounds really cool. I think I'd like to run something like that. And then you build the adventure based on the prompt rather than trying to run a published adventure itself. So I hope that helps. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you enjoyed this show and you want more stuff like this, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related email with links to all of the other work that I do all over the internet. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to things like the 5e Artisanal database, a whole bunch of adventures, tips, tricks, tools to help you run your games. The Hero Tier subscribers get a dedicated podcast every Thursday called Readings and Reflections that's based on the articles that I publish, and you help me put on shows like this. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Companion, Lazy DM's Workbook, Forge of Foes, City of Arches, and more at the Sly Flourish Bookstore. All of the links for those are in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.